Dennis Ramundi and Phil Goldberg here. Phil, author of American Veda, and our guest today was Elizabeth-Ursic, professor, very well educated in the area of religious studies, and of course her interest, women ritual, and women's role in religion, or in some religions, the lack of a role, and that being addressed. Um, one of the things you touched upon, and it's something I'd like to discuss with folks, Catholics maybe we have on the show, or those Orthodox Jews, which has to do with women, because in Catholicism, which I have some familiarity with, it's still, I consider, sexist. Women have a very limited role. The big shots, the Pope, the cardinals, the bishops, they're all men. None are women, and all the big decision makers, all the people that are allowed to participate and actually do the major rituals, what Catholics call sacraments, it's all men. Is there a point where people just are not going to stand for that anymore?
I think yeah, probably. I mean, I'm not an expert on, the Catholic Church and where it's going, but, these things seem inevitable. When we were kids, women didn't play basketball.
Right.
Right. I remember, and any woman who wanted to play sports was a tomboy.
Yeah, there was a sports program in high schools. The kids should know that. For girls, it was almost nothing. You could be a cheerleader. You wouldn't know sports.
I know.
It took legislation to change all that.
And now, we have women's heroic sports here, figures, and it's so things change. And, a lot of that, I think, has, it's in religions, and it's not just Catholicism, obviously, it's tied in with the changes in the roles of women in the culture as a whole. So in the days when people had a lot of children and no technologies, no washing machines, no refrigerators, and so forth, women had a certain role, and so there was a division of labor that may have made sense in those kind of cultures. And so that limited the number who could go into the priesthood, and the religions wanted to protect motherhood and all the rest of that stuff, I suppose. But all of that is changing, and it's really a shame. I mean, I remember meeting Catholic women 30, 40 years ago who really wanted to be priests. I mean, they were so devoted. They wanted to serve in those roles, and it was a great source of frustration to them. In fact, some of them, I mean, just a small handful, were so upset by that they sought their spiritual nourishment elsewhere, and a few of them became essentially gurus or representatives of Buddhist and Hindu lineages, where they could at least function in a teaching capacity.
Right. I have a good friend, Jennifer Diamond. She went to rabbinical school. She is an ordained rabbi, obviously Reformed. But she said, nobody from the Orthodox movement, or even the conservative movement within American Judaism anyway, recognizes her as actually being a rabbi. At least in Judaism, there are some avenues, even if not recognized by the whole group.
In Protestant Christianity as well.
Right. Catholicism, I don't know how they get away with it. We have a pope now that seems to be incredibly progressive, and maybe that is one of the areas in which they will progress, and that is the role of women in the church. How is it in Buddhism? I don't know.
That's interesting. It's interesting because I think there's some tension when you say Buddhism, it's a diverse thing. So, Buddhism in Japan is different from Buddhism in Tibet, is different from Buddhism in Burma, and then we have American Buddhism, which reflects our culture. So there's prominent Buddhist teachers, female teachers in America. I don't know how much they would be able to do what they do in some of the more traditional cultures. And in the old days of Buddhism in Asia, it was very similar. There weren't, in India, there weren't that many female gurus and no representation in the major Hindu lineages, and in the same in the Buddhist lineages throughout Asia, very little leadership and authority invested in women. I think all that eventually changes.
I have a question for you, Phil, based upon for your research on your book, American Veda. In Hinduism, in India, and throughout the world, there are women goddesses, Saraswati and others. So that female imagery is deeply embedded in Hinduism. When Vedic thinking came to the West, came to the United States, through the various teachers and gurus who came that you discuss in great detail in your book, do you think the imagery of women as God, as goddesses, had influences on how Christians, Jews, non-Hindus in America and in Europe looked at their religions? And do you think they started looking more for female imagery, female
That's
energy?
interesting. I think that there's something to that, because I mean, one thing I noticed in my research is that the presence in modern contemporary spiritual arena, the presence of the divine feminine, either in the form of traditional imagery or in the chanting of mantras that are associated with female deities, and also the presence of female leadership in the world of yoga and in the different lineages that evolved from the gurus and Buddhist teachers who came here. So there's an upsurge. In fact, the most famous guru in the world now is a woman. And there's something to the fact that Amma hugs people, and she's this embodiment of divine feminine. Something is changing. You can clearly hear it. But to your question, I think a lot of women were drawn to the Hindu-oriented teachings and felt perhaps a little bit more at home because the divine feminine was honored and the imagery was there. And also, when Muktananda passed away and his lineage in the early 80s passed into the hands of the female guru known as Guru Mai.
Right.
That was a big deal because she was the first prominent guru in the West who was female. And that was liberating to a tremendous number of younger, especially younger American women. So, yeah, something to that. Even Yogananda, he would talk about Divine Mother all the time. And
well, also in Yogananda's movement, when Yogananda passed, the movement got turned over to and led by I forget her name, but a woman who and she stayed leader for something like 50 years. She passed away a couple of years ago, and another woman has taken over the leadership in that movement. So
let's just to be precise. To be precise, a man whose original name was James Lynn succeeded Yogananda, but he died 3 years later.
Oh, okay.
And then Dayamata took over, and she ran that whole international movement for 55 years. I mean,
self-realization fellowship for almost 60 years has been led by a woman, and can we ever imagine that happening in the Catholic Church? Maybe.
You and I won't live to see a female pope, but I hope we'll live to see female priests. To get back to Elizabeth-Ursic, who we just interviewed, I want to make sure we mention her book, which is tied to the subject you just raised of female imagery of the divine. Her book is called Women, Ritual, and Power, Placing Female Imagery of God in Christian Worship. And she did a lot of research and has brought out the fact that in the Bible, in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, there's a tremendous amount of female imagery that people kind of are unaware of or ignore. So that divine feminine, which Catholics kind of have because of the veneration of Mary,
Right.
but there's a lot in the Hebrew Bible, and Jews talk about Shekinah, which is kind of the female, the divine feminine. So her research, I think one of the reasons she did it was to elevate the feminine and to show that it's not just a product of modern liberals who are feminists.
Right. Yeah. Again, a book, Women, Ritual, and Power: Placing Female Imagery of God in Christian Worship. Great interview today, and I think we should follow up and really do a number of shows on the theme of the role of women in the various religion and spiritual groups
Yes.
that
Yeah, and
are that are organized and operating today. I think it's
we'll get a man to talk about it.
yeah.
I'm kidding.
Just kidding. So all right, till next time. And Dennis Rundy and Phil Goldberg, www.spiritmatterstalk.com, and please subscribe. It's free to subscribe, and we'll get you more information. And if you have any suggestion for guests, please go to the website and email us, and we'll follow up.
Yes, and along the lines of what we've been talking about, suggestions for female religious and spiritual leaders would be great.
Great. All right, Phil, next time.
Okay, Dennis.